Friends, I am Asha Nambisan, and on behalf of the Vijay Nambisan Trust, I welcome you this evening. Vijay Nambisan was a poet and writer whose work reflects his sharp intellect, powers of observation, sensitivity, and above all, his humanity. After his untimely passing away in 2017, the Vijay Nambisan Trust was set up in 2019 by his friends and family with a vision of enhancing our engagement with literature, the arts, and the humanities. The chief architect behind the trust is Dr. Kaveri Nambisan, his wife, and who's well known as a surgeon and a writer and a surgeon. She's now more of a writer than a surgeon. This is the third talk under the aegis of the Trust. We have had several eminent speakers, and today we have Professor G.N. Devy. We are honored to have him here. Let me tell you a little about him. Professor Devy was formerly the professor of English at the MS University. Later, he was the founder of the Adivasi Academy at Tagore in Gujarat. He has taught at the DAIICT in Gandhinagar and has recently been the Ubaid Siddiqui Chair Professor at the National Center for Biological Sciences, TIFR. He writes in 3 languages, English, Marathi, and Gujarati, and his books have received awards in all the 3 languages. In 2010, he initiated and led the world's largest language survey, which is published in a 50-volume series as the People's Linguistic Survey of India. He has authored or edited over 100 books, and many of these are translated into various Indian languages. One of the recent book that he has authored is Mahabharata, the Epic and the Nation, in 2022. And he has also edited the book, The Indians, Histories of a Civilization, with Tony Joseph and Ravi Korisetter. He has received several prestigious fellowships and many awards and honors, including the Honorable Fellowship of the Asiatic Society. He is also a Padma Shri awardee. Today, he will talk to us about nationalism, which is a very contemporary and much debated topic today. What the subject he's talking about is very interesting, a century of nationalism, the Tagore, Gandhi, and Ambedkar of 1923 and India now. The lecture will focus on the year 1923 and recount Rabindranath Tagore's visit to Gujarat in October-November 1923, Mahatma Gandhi's days in prison, and Dr. Ambedkar's being awarded the D.SC and being admitted to the bar in London. The lecture will present the thoughts of the 3 on the question of nationalism during India's independence movement. It will compare those 3 visions with the contemporary views on nationalism to assess how far we have moved as a society and as a nation from those visions. I welcome you, Professor Devy, and I look forward to a very interesting speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin what I have to say by thanking Dr. Kaveri and Asha ji for asking me to be here this evening to speak to you. Literature is my first love, and in normal times, speaking in the year 2023, I would have chosen to speak on T.S. Eliot's The Westland because it completes a century. The Westland use one of the Indian myths, actually from the Brihadaranyaka. A section in that poem is called What the Thunder Said. The story is, after having created the universe, Prajapati dances with joy. And while dancing, he speaks, he keeps only shouting, the. Then he calls all these creations, the Devas, Danavas, Manavas, and asks them, did you understand what I said? And each one gives a different answer. One says, yes, you said Datta, be a giver. Another says, you said Dayadhvam, be compassionate, and so on. The third one says Damyata. I would have gone into the body or the skin of some great literary work and spoken to you, speaking on the in memory of Vijay, because we remember him as a creative writer. But our times are such that instead of speaking about what the thunder said, it is good to look at the structure of the thunder. And so for 2023, while I was thinking of the T.S. Eliot's poem, I thought, why not speak of 1923 slightly differently? And so when I started looking at 1923, three very striking streams of thought came before my eyes. One, led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Another by Rabindranath Tagore, Gurudev. And third by Mahatma Gandhi. If I were to look back on our entire past and think of the very greatest, the names that come to my mind are Buddha, Kabir, Basveshwar, Tukaram. To that league, if I were to look for individuals who belong to that league, but in recent times, these three names qualify. I mean, they made us, between Gandhi, Tagore, Ambedkar, and of course many others, they made us who we are. And therefore I decided to think of 1923 and what these three minds were doing at that time. In 1923, young Ambedkar, having recently launched his memorable magazine with the help of Shahu Maharaj of Kolhapur, had gone back to England and was writing his thesis, which he wrote under the title, The Question of the Indian Rupee. In March, the thesis was submitted, he got the degree. But by October that year, the thesis was published in the form of a book. It was so immensely popular immediately that it sold out in 2 years' time, all the copies. And when Dr. Ambedkar, when in 1948, Dr. Ambedkar had to bring out the second version of that book, he relooked at that book and wrote the following. I'm going to read out from the preface to the second edition of The Question of the Rupee. The problem of the rupee, not the question of the rupee, the problem of the rupee. So Ambedkar writes, Problem of the Rupee was first published in 1923. Ever since its publication, it has had a great demand, so great that within a year or two the book went out of print. The demand for the book has continued, but unfortunately I could not bring out a second edition of the book for the reason that my change over from economics to law and politics left me no time to undertake such a task. I have therefore devised another plan. It is to bring out an up-to-date edition of the history of Indian currency and banking in 2 volumes, of which the problem of the rupee forms volume 1. The second volume, by the way, never got written. Volume 2 will contain the history of Indian currency and banking from 1923 onwards. What is therefore issued to the public now is a mere reprint of the problem of the rupee under a different name. Ambedkar says that since 1923, not many scholars had attended to the question of the Indian rupee the same way, and therefore there was no point in revising the book, and so he issued it ditto, the way it was. Now, what did this book contain? It was, of course, a dissertation, and Ambedkar's job was to look at the disparity in the rupee coins. It's rather simple. So, perhaps many of you know that in 1871, Lord Mayo passed a Criminal Tribes Act, for which he was murdered in less than 3 months' time. In October, 12th October, the act came in. By February, Mayo was murdered by Sher Ali Afradi, who was affected by that act. I mean, the act was to brand many communities, 191 communities, as born criminal, not criminal by deed, but by birth. Now, in 71, the British government had recently taken over the government taken over India from the East India Company after 1857. And soon after that, the British decided to acquire the function, the authority of minting coins. I mentioned the 1871 Act because the first community included in the list of criminal tribes was Meena. But not as Meena, they were called counterfeiters. The Meenas were the traditional coin makers for different princes. And they knew the equivalence they knew the equation between the weight of a coin and the value of a coin. These were used by different princes. The coins used in Mysore were not the coins used in Banaras. The weight of the coins was different. After the company rule ended and the British came to power, the British government took over. They had somehow to bring uniformity among all these coins. They had already taken over the function of coin making, calling the Meenas counterfeiters and therefore criminals. Now there was a problem. Some of the coins weighed, for example, about 5 grams. Other coins with the same value weighed 5.1 grams or 4.9 grams. Now these coins were made of silver or gold. And so the British wanted to bring a uniformity in the weight and the value of the coins. So from 1860 onward and through the decade of the 1870s and the 1880s, they appointed 5 different commissions. And each commission made suggestions. But each of those commissions, in Europe too there was this problem. It was not only in India, because some European states use silver, others use gold standard. So silver standard or gold standard, parity of weight and value was a big international issue. And the British appointed a series of commissions. Those commissions came up with recommendations, invariably linking the new form of the coin either to the silver standard or to the gold standard. Ambedkar went through all these reports. In fact, he went through all the reports till 1919, from 1861 to 1919, almost several decades, and came to the conclusion that the problem is not the parity if silver or gold standards are kept alive, but the problem is the coin itself. The concluding part of the thesis is, Ambedkar writes, if I had my wish and if I had the control of the mint, I would immediately liquidate, melt all the coins and issue paper currency. Now, why do I get into this at length? Because the second edition of, by the way, by then, Americans had already started issuing paper currency in a limited way, and Ambedkar had his stint at in one of the American universities a few years before he wrote this dissertation. It is the same person who sat as the chair of the drafting committee of the Constitution, and his attitude to Indian communities as seen in the Constitution is absolutely the identical attitude, because on that day when India became subsequently 3 or 4 years later the Republic, it said that all those who are here become citizens, and all of, irrespective of where they were born, from where they came, but they were all admitted as citizens. The moment India said, we the people hereby accept, give to ourselves this constitution, everybody alive and a Homo sapien became citizen. And all of the citizens, by guarantee of the constitution, had equal rights. The economic, the monetary vision of Ambedkar and the social vision of Ambedkar, they match. There is a point in between in his career that comes in 1936 when he wrote the Annihilation of Caste, where he took a stand which was justifiably but entirely from the angle of the oppressed classes. But the Constitution of India did not take that stand. The Constitution of India looked at all alike, whether silver or gold, whether less value or more value. Ambedkar's nationalism was embedded in this value, which was founded on the principle of, in the simplest possible words, equality. Equality, irrespective of. And actually, in the question of the problem of the rupee, Ambedkar begins his thesis saying, quoting an American president, philosopher, who had said that to impose equality on unequals causes injustice. Ambedkar's nationalism was founded in the principle of equality. He wanted a nation where all are equal. And therefore, even in the 1936 version of his philosophy, social philosophy, the Annihilation of Caste, there is in paragraph 42, 43, 44, he is talking to socialists of his days. And there is a debate whether you want freedom first or equality first. And then Ambedkar says to them that you are fighting for freedom, but if you are free as unequal society, will you be able to manage the nation? Why don't you wait for everybody to become equal and then get into freedom and make that nation which will be more lasting? This was his view. Now, one may agree with it or not, but one will certainly agree with the principle of equality as the founding principle of Indian nationalism. I will now turn to, in 1923, while Ambedkar was writing his dissertation in London, I'll now turn to see what Gandhi was doing. Gandhi was in that year in jail, in Yeroda jail. I must explain a little bit the background. Gandhi made his first visit to Karnataka in 1921, and he visited Belgaum, Dharwad, Gadag. He raised a crop of young volunteers making his own position in the Congress stronger. I mean, he did not create the youth brigade, the Sevadal, to make him stronger, but it led to increase in his strength. In the Calcutta session of the Congress and subsequently in 1924, he was also the president of the Congress. Gandhi had by then already firmly established the Sabarmati Ashram. He had firmly re-rooted himself in the Indian soil after his years in South Africa. And in the wake of the Rowlatt Act, which brought in India for the first time the Sedition Act. I mean, you must have heard of Sedition Act in recent times. Tilak was made a victim of that. So was Gandhi. Gandhi had written 3 essays in his own newspaper. And for writing those essays, those articles, he was charged with sedition. So he was tried. There's a very moving speech he made while speaking to the judge. The judge said, "Do you plead guilty, Mr. Gandhi?" He said, "Of course, I do plead guilty. I have written these articles and I stand by these articles. But may I point out to you, my lord," Gandhi said, "that you have only 2 choices. Either you punish me because you have this act with you, this system with you, or you resign because you have got conscience. Because you know that you are serving a bad law, that you are serving an unjust system." The judge said that I will do my duty, though there is a good reason for me to agree with you. But do you, Mr. Gandhi, plead guilty? And Gandhi said, as I know, Tilak was punished under the same act, and what greater privilege I can have in your regime than being punished under the same act, because it's a great, great privilege to be treated at par with Maharaj Tilak Maharaj. When I finish my term in jail, I will come out and I'll do precisely the same thing over again. So please do not forget me to charge me again and punish me again. You must go to that. He was jailed in March 22. Please do, when you find time, even Mr. Google can show you this speech of Gandhi. It's a very moving speech. Gandhi has said in that speech that if there is an unjust regime, and if a person within that state feels that it is unjust, he should have the freedom to say so. And that does not amount to sedition. It's not displeasure with the state, disaffection towards the state. That is the term used for punishing. Disaffection towards the state is now fairly popular phrase. That was used to punish Gandhi. He said it's not disaffection towards the state, it is affection towards non-violence. But if somebody is spreading disaffection in order to cause violence, then it's a crime, and I shall, Gandhi was saying, he said in that speech, I shall never advocate violence. In fact, one of those 3 articles was about non-violence. Gandhi then was sent to jail, and in jail he was very lonely. And we think of looking at the film Richard Attenborough, so that Gandhi was constantly busy. Yes, he was. But in the year 1923, 100 years before our time, let me tell you how lonely Gandhi was. The most notable events of his life are given in volume 29, Chronology of the Life of Mahatma Gandhi in 1923. Volume 29 of Mahatma Gandhi's collected writings also show that. On 27 January, Kasturba visited Gandhiji. Then nothing happens. Till 10 February, there is a satyagraha in Mulshi, and some prisoners are flogged for refusing to work. Then in April 16, Devdas meets Gandhi. From May, Gandhi becomes extremely unwell, some stomach ailment. And for several months, he is being treated, but he refuses to take treatment because he says that it is not the same. All prisoners are not treated at par in medical treatment. Some are given more privileges, others are not, and he won't have that treatment. Then I think there are about 15 or 16 notable events that happen in Gandhi's life in 1923, and he is alone in Yeroda. In 1923, Gandhi is 54-year-old. He has had one tremendous triumph of a satyagraha in South Africa and a very traumatizing failure of starting a movement which had to be called up after the Chori Chora violence. So balancing these two, Gandhi is in retrospect looking at his life, and then he decides to start writing. The most phenomenal work he ever wrote is called Satyagraha in South Africa. That in 23 October he started writing it. In 24 it started getting serialized in his own newspaper. It continued like that till 25. In 26 it got translated into English and it came out in the form of a book. It was about the same time, that is 1925-26, when Gandhi had started serializing in his own newspaper his experiments with truth. That is, looking at the mind of the man in mid-50s, while independence is far, far away, he is thinking about some very serious issues. And in the Satyagraha in South Africa, he states that my mission is my struggle, is search for truth. If one were to be climbing the Everest as a mission, that mission and my mission, search for truth, if one were to compare, mine is even more difficult. But if I succeed, Gandhi writes, one of his very rare statements on God. He was religious, but he's writing about God. He's writing about Rama, but God in abstract. One of the rare sentences, statements. He says, if I succeed in my mission of getting at truth, I will see God in his face. Face to face, I'll see God. Because truth alone is God. In Satyagraha in South Africa, Gandhi writes, by the way, Ambedkar was engaging with British history when he wrote The Problem of the Indian Rupee. When I go to Tagore, I'll mention that Tagore was engaging with what happened in Japan. And Gandhi here in Maharashtra, Yeroda, a Gujarati man, arrested, was thinking of South Africa and freedom and rights movement in South Africa. Our nationalism has had international moorings from the word go. Gandhi says in the Satyagraha in South Africa that what do humans need more than liberty? No matter where they belong. And liberty is not the question of land, but of love. It's not the question of force, military, but of truth. Let me now turn to what I would like to read out paragraph after paragraph from, but I will. Avoid that temptation. In 1923, while Gandhi was in jail and Ambedkar was in London, Tagore was traveling in Gujarat. Tagore had got his Nobel almost a decade before that. He was already a very famous man all over the world. And all the Rajas in India respected him almost as a Raja or a Rishi. He went to small states like Morvi, Morvi where the bridge collapsed recently. The Raja, he begged the Raja for relief to be sent to Japan because an earthquake had shattered Japan. And Tagore in 1923 wanted to collect relief fund for Japanese. Therefore, traveling to Gujarat and begging a Nobel Prize winning man, going to the Raja of Morvi, who gave him 500 rupees donation. Then he went to Rajkot, then he went to Bhavnagar, then he went to Dagandra. He went to as many small states in Gujarat as possible and collected money and sent it to Japan. This year is particularly important in Tagore's life and in our national life. Not because Tagore was thinking of Japan and a pan-Asian unity of nations, because Tagore had decided to reject nationalism as a philosophy for India. Not because of that, but something else. This rejection of nationalism that Tagore had made came earlier, a few years earlier, 1918, when he lectured on nationalism. And I'll quote something from that for you. But in 1923, Tagore gave a symbolic form to his political ideas. And that symbolic form came in the manner of a play. Probably his most complex play called Rakta Karibi, the Red Oleander. Many of you might have read it or seen it performed. If a performance of Red Oleander has not happened in Bangalore International Center, it should be invited and that play should be performed. That's a story of a king who rules the kingdom by remaining completely invisible. There's a kind of an iron curtain. Nobody's seen the king. Nobody knows who he is. All that they know is there's a king. That kingdom has mines. I'm not talking of Orissa. That kingdom has mines, gold mines. And the king uses his sardars to torture people, to work in the mines, to get gold, to make the king rich. With the help of machines and military force, the king is ruling a faceless regime. There's a girl called Nandini who is kind of a spirit of nature, completely free. Liberty breathes through her. Freedom is the first and the last thing for her in life. And she happens to go close to the king, and she manages to change his heart. It is not a play like a revolution where the king is finished. It's not Mruchakatikam. Mruchakatikam is another kind of revolution, brewing up in the forest. But here the king's heart is changed, and things improve. This Rakta Karabi, name of, she's using these flowers all the time, gifting flowers to people she knows and so on. Now apparently this play looks like a kind of childish plot, but when you get into the play, you find a tremendous amount of complexity in it, psychological and symbolic complexity. Rabindranath started writing the play in 1923 in order to give some kind of concrete form to his idea of what a nation should be. And his idea of nation was that it is nation like Gandhi's idea. A nation is not land. It is what the heart says to other hearts. I'll read out at least a few lines from his lectures on nationalism. When our nationalists talk about ideals, they forget, this is Tagore, a few years before Rakta Karabi. When our nationalists talk about ideals, they forget that the basis of nationalism is wanting. The very people who are upholding these ideals are themselves the most conservative in their social practice. Nationalists say, for example, look at Switzerland, where in spite of race differences, the peoples are solidified into a nation. Yet remember that in Switzerland, the races can mingle, they can intermarry because they are of the same blood. In India, there is no common birthright. And when we talk of Western nations, we forget that the nations there do not have that physical repulsion, one for the other, that we have between different castes. Have we an instance in the whole world where people who are not allowed to mingle their blood blood in the blood of another except by coercion or for mercenary purposes? And can we ever hope that these moral barriers against our race amalgamation will not stand in the way of our political unity? Do I find Tagore of 1918 any different from Ambedkar of 1936? No. Do I find Tagore of 1923, Rakta Karabi, mingling of blood without coercion, Rakta Karabi? Do I find that Tagore any different from Gandhi of South Africa, Satyagraha? No. The three, despite lot of efforts made to show how Tagore and Gandhi collided, how Ambedkar and Gandhi will never see face to face, had a common shared understanding of what nation is, which is very often overlooked. I must now, since I'm thinking of 1923, think of a couple of other books. In 1923-24, perhaps, Hitler's Mein Kampf was written. When Gandhi was saying that truth alone is God, and Tagore was saying that there should be no coercion at all for a nation to exist as a nation, and Ambedkar was saying all be equal in a good nation, Hitler was saying that there has to be a pure Aryan blood to dominate. When Gandhi was saying that for preaching non-violence, if you want to punish me, and again I will come out and preach non-violence, punish me again and once again, it has become a habit for me to preach non-violence. There, violence was being preached. A sharp contrast. That was being done in Germany in the name of a party which had the word national. Hitler's party had in its name the word national. National Socialist Party. But I need not go to far off shores. Here in India, we had a variety. In 1923, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar was coming to the end of his Andaman term. Gandhi said, punish me again, because I will speak against injustice. In contrast, Savarkar was writing in the same year mercy petitions, and he got relief. In that year, he wrote a booklet which was published under the title The Essentials of Hindutva. The name of the author mentioned in that title was Ek Maratha. The real name of the author was not mentioned. That was mentioned in the subsequent edition of that book, that booklet which then became a book. In the Essentials of Hindutva, Savarkar lists 7 principles of Hindutva. The first is what is Hinduism. Second is what is Hindutva, how the two are different. And it goes on and on. Then who can be citizen of a Hindu Rashtra? And finally, the last principle of the 7 principles was that there will be a party which in the second edition says Hindu Mahasabha, to bring in, of course now Hindu Mahasabha does not exist in the same way as it did, to become the party to usher in the Hindu Rashtra. Of course, Savarkar had his freedom to write that book, even in the British times, and publish it. And that's remarkable. I'm not wishing for their return here, but it's remarkable. While Gandhi was charged for sedition, Savarkar was allowed to write that book. In those 7 principles, the most crucial, foundational principle was that there is a Pitru Bhumi. Like we say the term, we use the term Matrubhumi, motherland. There's Pitru Bhumi. Pitru Bhumi is the term that Adolf Hitler also used for the German land. But at that time, Savarkar and Adolf Hitler did not know each other. It's later that the Germans got this book translated into, Hitler got this translated into the German language because it suited him. There is a Pitru Bhumi, and all those who are in the Pitru Bhumi are potential citizens. However, Savarkar says, those who belong to that Pitru Bhumi should also have their Punya Bhumi there. If their Punya Bhumi does not belong there, then, and it belongs elsewhere, then those will be potentially suspected citizens. Their loyalty will be to the Punya Bhumi and not to the Pitru Bhumi. And therefore, they should not be treated as primary citizens. They can be citizens to receive mercy, to receive all the gains from the state at the mercy of those whose Pitru Bhumi and Punya Bhumi match. That is the Hindu Rashtra, Hindu nation. This was the vision that Savarkar, 1923, that we are in 2023, and therefore exactly 100 years ago, these different varieties, different shades of what nationalism is, were being put forward in our country. Gandhi got released almost after 2 years, about 1 year, 11 months or 10 months. This was his 9th imprisonment. All the earlier imprisonments were relatively shorter, some months, 2-3 months or a few days. This was the longest till then. In 1926, the Congress session adopted a resolution. In 1927, that resolution was repeated and adopted with some improvement. The 26-27 resolutions were technically moved by Motilal Nehru. But, not just but and but. I want to enter 2 caveats. The first is, in the 1926 Congress session, after Gandhi's release and the publication of South Africa, Gandhi made one of the finest speeches of his life about the rights of people in South Africa. And in that speech, he says a nation can be a nation only if the minorities have full rights in that nation. He had taken South Africa, and he was very angry because of Smuts-Gandhi agreement being violated and all that. Minorities to have full rights as citizens was the spirit in which Motilal Nehru's resolutions came forward and were approved, adopted. One of those resolutions about Indian nation to be was that when India becomes independent, it will necessarily be a multilingual nation. There will not be a single Indian language as the language, or Rashtrabhasha, or whatever you call it, but many languages. We have to accept the manyness, diversity of languages and diversity of culture will form the foundation of Indian nation. 1926. The debate continued. In 10 years' time, say 1937, the two-nation theory had come up. One cannot say that Savarkar's thesis on Hindus being primary citizens and Muslims not being primary citizens was mainly responsible for two-nation theory. But that was the view that Ambedkar took of Savarkar's writings. That's not my view. Jinnah, of course, is responsible, very much responsible. And I don't want to get into that debate whether Jinnah was responsible or Savarkar or equally, or who was more or less. What happened was unfortunate. Then, in 1947, we became independent. We became a nation. It was defined in the Constitution as India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. The union of states was not just the geographic states, going back to what Tagore and Gandhi and Ambedkar were saying, but also mental states. It's a union of states. Diversity became the second foundational principle of Indian nation. Freedom was the one. Diversity became the second foundational principle. And amity and brotherhood, love and affection, conversation and dialogue, give and take, became the culture as defined for the nation by the makers of our nation. We are in 2023. 100 years after some of the greatest Indians have spoken about what nation can be. We, a century later, still have some space left for us to say that we agree with the visions of Rabindranath Tagore, Mahatma Gandhi, and Ambedkar about what our nation should be. We still have some space left for us to say, as Gandhi did, while sedition was slapped on him, he said, I made it my habit to say that here is an unjust regime, and if I am imprisoned and punished and released, I'll say it again. We still have space to have that faith in what Gandhi called truth, which gave him the courage to face imprisonment, or what Tagore called love, which allowed him to dream of such a beautiful world where nations melt away, dissolve, and humans start speaking to humans. I was supposed to speak of literature, and literature is that art which uses expression for communication of heart to heart, human to human. Literature has no race, no gender, no color, no language really. Literature has essentially just this tremendous urge to say to other humans, we can still speak. And therefore, before it is too long, before the night darkens, let me speak. I think these three thinkers of Indian nationalism can be considered as among our greatest writers also, because they told us to speak before it becomes too dark. Thank you.
So, how can we know that people are being treated equally? What is the criteria for that? I mean, that's the hard question, right? I mean, which you yourself said that the people are different, but they have to be treated equal. So how do you manage that? How do you treat different people equally? Which you raised in your topic, but you did not expand a little bit. I'd like you to expand a little bit on that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a very important question, and thank you for asking that question. I'm grateful to you for asking that question. People, each individual has her or his volition, personality, cultural habits, desires, aspirations, and they shall never be uniform, that we know. But if there is a framework which guarantees equality, and if an individual feels that there is some injustice or inequality, that framework responds to the pleas of those who feel becoming victims of inequality, that is enough for the state to do. The state cannot treat all people like a school teacher will treat all children in a class. That is not the function of the state. It is for the state to provide for a framework which recognizes equality when people want to be equal. Now, Tagore answers your question differently than I had done. The answer I offer to you is Ambedkar's answer. Ambedkar also had cautioned us. He said, even if we make a very good constitution, if the people who wrote that constitution turn out to be incompetent, even a good constitution can become disastrous. Tagore had a different answer to this. And he said that it is not for this faceless regime which knows machines and production and commodity and exchange and wealth and tax and stuff like that, but it is for individuals to breathe the spirit of equality in her or his relation with the others. So Tagore places the responsibility of bringing in equality on individuals in the society, not on the state. Ambedkar and Tagore differ there. Gandhi said in his speech to the judge in the case, he said that my job is to fight for the little. By little, you mean samanya, or the ordinary. And I notice the injustice that the ordinary suffer, and I fight for them, and I fight for all ordinary people till every ordinary person gets what he or she deserves or wants. All three, Ambedkar, Tagore and Gandhi, did not glorify greed of individuals over and above the need of the society or the duty of the state. So the one basis of bringing equality is to satisfy the economic needs of the individuals, all sections of the society. That is equality. And the other method is to learn to respect difference. That is, yes, your methods of prayer are not like her methods of prayer, but they're both prayers, and they're both prayers to the Almighty. Therefore, they need to be respected. Now, suddenly somebody will get up and say, but what about appeasement? Now, that appeasement is a kind of a terminology which arises in the dictionary of elections and gaining power. And was Ambedkar appeasing the Dalits? I will say no. He was speaking on behalf of the Dalits. Was Gandhi appeasing his Baniya class in Gujarat because they did not run the government and some governor from Bombay was running the Bombay state? No. Gandhi was speaking for justice for everybody. And Tagore was speaking for love for everybody. So, your question is a difficult question. I wish there was one single clear answer which all of us could follow. But there is one single principle that all of us can follow in our lives, and that is what Gandhi stated very famously when he said, see the change, be the change that you want to see in the world. So it will begin with oneself. Perhaps our homes, our behavior with our children, the animals around us, birds around us, and so on. I know the world is not idealistic, but I know that the world can become idealist. That is the ultimate goal of Homo sapiens. I have not given up hope even now.
Good evening, sir. I was just having a discussion with my friend on hegemonic nationalism, and just to contextualize, what was said in 1923 for the eve of independence to where we are today. We know there are a lot of popular governments across the world, and who are willing to, exploit the differences. So, how does that hegemonic nationalism? Where would you balance it for, in contextualizing where world economy, where the digital market economy is leading? Thank you.
Okay, I got to answer for your one question. One is, of course, I would like to revisit the year 1915, when the idea of national freedom for African and Asian nations was rolled out. Nationalism existed in Europe for Italy and Germany, unification of Italy, unification of Germany. Ireland was still struggling. Sinn Féin had collapsed despite once going all the way to London. This autonomy of Ireland was ruled out. It is after 1915, 1916 that Ireland, or 17, that Ireland got autonomy. Say, I chose the year 1923 to 1947, that's precisely 25 years. some views were put forward in those 25 years. Over the last 75 years, we have tried our very best to violate the principles laid down in those 25 years. But the principles laid down in 25 years have still managed to keep us somehow floating afloat. So, one way is to create in this society around us possibilities of philosophy, creativity, reflection and meditation. We have systematically, through our education system, our media, our varieties of entertainment that we have, and the way we have chosen to live the lifestyles, we systematically killed creativity, reflection, meditation and philosophy. When today you ask anybody, just anybody, who is the best cricketer, and at least half a dozen or 2 dozen names will come. Who is the best actor, at least a dozen names will come. Who is the best Indian philosopher today? No name. Because we exiled philosophy, meditation. What we have for meditation is commodified versions of self-hypnotism and delusion. But the other answer is, how do we, you asked about the contemporary situation. You think of Africa and Asia on the map, 52 nations plus 48 nations in these two continents, 100 nations together. They hold roughly a little over 4 billion people. More than half, 55% of humanity, they live in these two nations. On the United Nations official list of trouble points, conflict points, 31 are listed, where some internal genocide or external clash is going on for these 100 nations. I was thinking about this and I realized that after the dissolution of USSR, and I'm not a card-holding communist, but I like to think once in a while. No, that was not intended. I apologize to all communists. After the dissolution of USSR, after 3 terms of Mrs. Thatcher's rule in England, where a Thatcher economics had settled as a system, and after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the world had become unipolar. These are the years 1988, 89, Perestroika, Glasnost, in 1993, advisor to American foreign policy wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations, Samuel Huntington. Actually, at that moment in human history, if the world had come together, we thought it's a globalized world, if we had come together to fight poverty or inequality, we could have achieved a lot. But instead of turning to economic wants, the attention was diverted to cultural and religious conflicts. They were produced as commodities. I will not blame only USA, because once again, I am not a sworn communist or assisting, but I am in my 7th decade of my life, and when I was in my 30s and 20s and 30s and 40s, I had not heard the term terrorists. Muslims were still there in the world. But after this Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, suddenly an Iran erupted, an Iraq erupted, and Saudi erupted, a Taliban erupted, and Afghanistan erupted, Al-Qaeda erupted, everywhere. As if from the times of the birth of Prophet Muhammad till today, till 1990, they were all right, and suddenly they became terrorists. That's not convincing. That is, I am saying the future for humanity is to look at revisit the history of African and Asian continents in terms of conversations of civilizations, not clash of civilizations. I mean, I know that somebody will come and tell me, but think of the Crusades. For 2 centuries, the Muslims went to Portugal and Spain, and the Spaniards and the Portuguese went to Turkey and Syria and chopping each other's heads. No. My Al-Biruni, my Ibn Battuta belong to the same time. They came and they speak of music. They speak of many languages. They were doing Kashida. I mean, in this very building, there's a wonderful exhibition of saris where Sita, Draupadi, 5 mythological women are depicted there. But the depiction is with the help of Kashida, embroidery, which has come from Arabic source. It's a conversation of civilization. We've forgotten that. We're thinking only of clash of civilization. That we have internalized that vision of the world is shows in the 31 spots where these genocidal things are happening in Africa and Asia. We will have to restate for ourselves. When I say ourselves, not for India. Like Tagore and Gandhi thought of thinking about not just India but about everybody. We'll have to think of all other nations together with us. And then we will realize what a wonderful gift we have within us to give to the rest of the world. India can become Vishwaguru if every Indian learns to be a little less nationalistic. Not till then. Really, there is, last 1,000 years is the history of Sufism, of immensely powerful poetry of love. You think of all the writers of last 1,000 years, whether it's Meera, Kabir, Tukaram, Basveshwar, Akka Mahadevi here, or the Arabic and the Persian poets. I think we have our values all embedded within us, but it's just that we seem to have forgotten under the spell of some kind of hypnotism. I don't want to blame media. I want to blame myself. If we open our eyes and look around, in India and outside India, we'll see that many of us have come together to form who we are. And that is what has happened in other countries also. It is not like Afghanistan people belong to Afghanistan for times immemorial. They also came out of Africa. Some of them stopped in Afghanistan, some came to India, settled here, some went further down, East Asia. We're all one and the same. Gandhi was thinking of that truth. He said, if I come face to face with truth, I'll see God. I think for every Indian, if we can look at entire Africa and Asia with open eyes and not think through the prism of clash of civilizations, but think the way we have been as conversation of civilization, dialogue of civilization, we will understood all our religions, not just my religion. It's very precious. I'm proud of being who I am in religious terms. But I think I will be even prouder if I understood all religions. Why not? Thank you.
Would you say that our educational curriculum and the way we teach history should completely be changed? We are presenting people with facts. We are now thinking of taking away chapters of history and how they're going to present it. Do you think the whole educational system is greatly to blame for not introducing this kind of liberal philosophic approach to history? The fact that no country is an island by itself. Madam, it's acquired civilization.
Madam, you know that you ask a question with which I can hardly disagree. You know that, and
That's where the crux
but I will first thank our education system for allowing everybody who wants to educate to have access to it, at least in theory. At least in theory. But I'll blame our education system for not sufficiently widening that access. And therefore, we are imposing our knowledge, if knowledge it were, on people whose life experience is completely different. I mean, my friend Devanur Mahadev has a life experience and which needs to be brought into educational stream. Some time back, I think his lesson was removed from textbook. Now it is reinstated. Yes, history teaching in our country has suffered many jewels. I mean, I can give you very precise dates. History teaching started in India in 1861 with the introduction of the civil services examination. And at that time, the British history as it was taught in England was not British history up to date. It was on history only up to the Elizabethan period. Elizabeth was exempted from history. She had to be housed into that later. In 15 years' time that happened because the syllabus was reframed by the University of London. Our students learned the British history. I went to college to study. In college, I was allowed to study mathematics, history and economics. I ducked in economics. I was good in maths, having come from a village. And history kept me entertained. But the history I studied was history of British law in India. From 1760, the Regulating Act to 1947. That was the history taught. Then, subsequently, Indian history came. So, Indian history, the first vision presented was the vision that Sir William Jones had presented to us. That India had everything great in ancient times. Tagore has very scathing remarks about, he says to nationalists of his times, he says, you are only repeating that India had everything perfect in the past. You're making a mistake. If you don't look at what flaws there were in the past, you will never be able to perfect your present. This is in black and white in his lectures on nationalism groups. So, Sir William Jones, in the second lecture given to the Asiatic Society, he said, my job is, my business is, that is William Jones's business, is to look up at the Indian past up to the 11th century, not beyond. That means not after 11th century. So, at a single stroke, Sir William Jones castigated the medieval times of India as some kind of dark period. Now, to me, what was this dark period? What William Jones calls dark period, what was it to me? It was the time when my Jnaneshwar started writing beautiful Marathi. My Tukaram came up. My Narsi Mehta came up. My Basveshwar and Akkamadevi came up. My philosophers and poets. Great times of expressivity, expression. In theatre, there was a democratization of even religion in those centuries because paper got into use in India from the 12th century onwards. In the 13th century, there were very rich merchants in Delhi. They had become rich because just as Ambani has capitalized on oil and somebody else on mobile, paper made many people very, very rich in the 13th century. Paper brought the possibility of democratization of religion and slackening the social systems. And that's how new writers coming from the fringes in Marathi, which I know, there was a tailor who became a great poet. There was a potter who became a great poet. There was a cobbler who became a great poet. And they were treated as saints. That entire period was put in a box and sealed sealed box by Sir William Jones and his followers in Bengal in the early part of the 19th century. It was in the second half of the 19th century that historians both in the south and in Bengal and in Maharashtra started looking at the archives. And because those were the times when we were fighting the British, suddenly the Rajas resurfaced. And so heroic histories came. And these were also second half of the 19th century. Some books were wrongly imposed on us and admired by people in England and people here. Books like the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon, which is a good book, and Thomas Carlyle's Heroes and Hero Worship. Carlyle worships Napoleon for, despite Napoleon's destroying the new revolution in France, Carlyle came. So we started creating heroes. Even Savarkar was, he wrote about the War of Independence, First War of Independence. Joseph Mazzini eulogized and created him as a very great man. Understood it. It was in this mid-20th century that we caught up with history as explained by Hegel in terms of cause and consequence, as a causality sequence. And we did a fairly good job. So we have, in short, good historians. Indian historians are terrific. Probably the best historians in the world are in India, Indians. So we had very good historians, but very poor history teaching, because our educational philosophy, second science policy of free government of India, tied everything to the goal of producing engineers. And for what reason I don't understand till now. Engineers in India were not required to know history. If engineers knew some history and historians knew some mathematics, India would have been a much kinder place. So you're right, but we can correct. We can correct this course, because in future history is going to disappear in the virtual space, and all memory will collapse together as a single present, and everybody will have her or his choice. So my hope is that Indians and others in Asia and Africa and Europe will use their sense and sensibility to choose from history what is useful for the future. I have faith in humans. I have faith in God, but I still have faith in humans. Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah. There are two questions. Can we split that one into two halves?
Okay, and quick answers.
Sorry. Yeah, I take you.
Yeah, so you mostly answered it in the previous questions, but I just wanted to understand your view on is there any need for nationalism, And I also wanted to understand, if you could add more light on what Tagore had, his idea of, Asia being this sort of one entity and borders sort of melting away. But yeah, if you could just cover that.
In the 19th century, Italy and Germany created the European brand of nationalism. As against, there was a European brand of democracy, Western brand of that America had produced toward the end of the 18th century, and Ireland was producing through the Home Rule League in Ireland. We inherited both the idea of democracy and the idea of nationalism. But in the 20th century, the European countries that had held themselves in pride with in the name of nationalism became fascist countries, Germany and Italy. They had to be kept under control by countries that swore in the name of democracy. England, United States, France. Therefore, to answer to your question is there need for nationalism? There is need for nationalism so that we know that democracy is far superior as an idea than nationalism. If you have black, you see white more clearly.
Thank you so much for your talk. You mentioned that you have not given up hope, and I'm curious what the sources of your hope are and how you think we can expand the spaces in which that hope operates.
You want a personal answer or philosophical answer?
Maybe if you can include both.
Well,
I'm guessing that you, as a philosopher, that would be personal
for the personal
anyway.
answer, I had to ask my wife. Women help in keeping hope alive. Femininity as against masculinity. Gandhi gave hope to the country because in his appearance, in his methods, he had accepted a lot of femininity. Salt satyagraha. I mean, read it in Freudian terms. And mauna, fasting, non-cooperation, typically women's weapons. I mean, he made a great art of that. I mean, an empire collapse, a single woman can, make that happen. So, for hope to remain alive, and that's what Tagore captures. This mighty king who has all the gold in the world, one Nandini can just shake him out of his foundations. As a social answer, my hope is alive because I'm in Karnataka.